We are 5 races down in the 2025 Formula 1 season, and already we have some title contenders clearly emerging from the pack for this 2025 Formula 1 season. A couple of them are expected and drivers that we pretty much all knew were going to be fighting hard for this year's Drivers' Championship, but we have a couple more joining the party who were definitely not expected to be part of the championship battle. These 4 drivers are Max Verstappen, the current Drivers' World Champion, Lando Norris for McLaren, Oscar Piastri, also for McLaren, and George Russell for Mercedes. And at least at the minute, we do have the prospect of a proper 4-way fight for the Drivers' Championship. The first time we would have had that since 2010. But going forward into the rest of the season, what are the strengths and weaknesses of all these drivers going into this championship fight? And who is the most likely to win the battle once we get to Abu Dhabi in December? That is exactly what I'm going to get into in this video. And before I get into things, guys, make sure to smash the like button on this video and let me know in the comments section, out of those 4 drivers, who are you putting your money on to come out on top at the very end of 2025? But there are a few things I need to touch on before we actually get into looking at each driver. The first thing is talking about the drivers that I'm not going to be really reviewing in this championship contender video. And those 3 drivers are Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, and Kimi Antonelli. As for the Ferrari drivers, the car simply is not strong enough to have these 2 regularly winning races, which you need to do to be fighting for the championship. And the car, even though it's been getting better as the races have been going on, it has only barely been good enough to have even one of the Ferrari drivers on the podium, which is simply not good enough. Yes, George Russell has not won a race yet, but has been very consistent and has had quite a few podiums so far this year, which is keeping him pretty close in the championship battle despite not having a race-winning car. Whilst for Ferrari, especially after the first couple races, a lot of points were thrown away, which is why they're already quite far behind in the championship battle. So the Ferrari drivers for me are excluded. I don't see them in the Drivers' Championship fight. And for Kimi Antonelli, he is not ready yet. He is clearly second best to George Russell at Mercedes. He's had a good start to his Formula 1 career, but a championship battle he is not ready for just yet. And talking of the Drivers' Championship standings, let's have a look at them after the first 5 races and a sprint race that we have had in this season so far. Oscar Piastri, of course, took the lead about a week or so ago in Saudi Arabia and is 10 points clear of teammate Lando Norris. Max Verstappen a couple points back from Norris in 3rd, and George Russell a bit further behind than he was previously in 4th, but still in a good position considering the pace of the car relative to the McLaren. And then, as you can see, there is quite a big drop-off to then Leclerc, Antonelli and Hamilton, and I just don't think those 3 drivers, especially in the cars they've got, can make up the difference. Another key stat, though, we must go through before we get into the drivers individually is the wins stat for the season in terms of who has the most wins so far this season. Oscar Piastri, of course, has 3 race wins in the first 5 races. Max Verstappen has his win from the Japanese Grand Prix, a brilliant win at that. And Lando Norris, a great win from him in the first Grand Prix in Melbourne. And this is a very important stat, as we'll get onto with Oscar Piastri later on, because normally the driver who wins the most races in a Formula 1 season wins the championship in most cases. So coming out on top in this statistic could win you the championship. So it's very important to keep our eyes on who has the most wins or who is close in the wins category over the course of the year. But out of the 4 drivers contending for this year's driver's title, let's start with a driver who contended for last year's championship and a driver that was leading the championship up until the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. That is, of course, Lando Norris. A driver that was well liked and well respected by many amongst the F1 community in terms of just how good we thought he was. But at this point, he has become very polarizing. There are still many out there who believe in him and think he's very quick and a very good driver, but there is a growing set of people who just do not believe that Lando is championship material, and at this point, I would have to be one of them. First, let me compliment Lando on the great race win he had in Melbourne. Even though maybe, yes, he wasn't the quickest during that race, he did a great job at keeping it mostly all together in what was a very difficult Grand Prix. Obviously, the race started off wet, then we had a dry period, then it suddenly rained again. He went off the track, but just about kept it on the circuit when Oscar Piastri failed to, and of course that was the difference in Piastri not being able to secure a podium that day. Lando, despite that, still held on, even with a broken floor in those final few laps, to win the Australian Grand Prix. It was a good drive, wasn't perfect, but it was a very good drive in a very difficult race for many. And you would think after that Grand Prix, his confidence would be sky high, given just how difficult of a race that was and how easy it would have been to throw it all away and sacrifice loads of points to Max Verstappen, one of his main rivals, for the year. But since that Grand Prix, he has pretty much collapsed mentally. And the biggest problem has been way too many driver errors, and really simple driver errors from Lando in so many of the races since the Australian Grand Prix. Let's just go through some of them now. The sprint race, of course, he didn't have a great sprint qualifying going into the sprint race in Shanghai. Had a really horrible start where he was caught out in some horrible positions that he put himself into, and ended up losing even more positions, then didn't really make much progress in that sprint race. At least in the race in China, got up to second place and ended up holding on for a good second place. Then in Japan, obviously we know he lost out to Max Verstappen, but at least he didn't make any big errors that weekend that would come later in that triple header. The next Grand Prix after Japan, of course, was Bahrain, and he had an absolutely terrible weekend in what was clearly, despite what Lando was claiming around the time, the fastest car on the grid. McLaren should have easily been locking out the front row in that Bahrain Grand Prix qualifying session. Oscar Piastri did his job, took pole position. Lando Norris, half a second off the pace of his teammate and qualifying in 6th place. An absolutely awful lap by Norris, and even he was harshly critical of himself after that session. And in the race, even though he made progress and he did finish on the podium, he did claw back some points that may be important at the final Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi for his championship bid. It was a very scruffy race that wasn't really deserving of a podium. Firstly, starting way out of position on the grid. We've seen other drivers start out of position on the grid. It's not a new thing, so at least you could let Lando off for that. But it was a lot further. He was ahead of his grid slot compared to, say, what Alonso had done, I remember, back a couple years ago in Saudi Arabia, where it was only a slight difference. He, of course, received a penalty for that, a 5-second penalty, which did hurt his race quite a bit and cost him, really, second place in the Bahrain Grand Prix, but also still had a really good chance on track of still finishing in second, but when racing other cars for critical positions like Leclerc and like Russell, really did not cope well. Locking up into turn 1 when he had a decent chance of being able to at least force another driver into, going out of position so Norris could then make a move later on in the lap. Wasn't exactly great at that. And then if you look at that final lap in Bahrain, George Russell's soft compound tyres were absolutely finished. Lando was in a faster car on much better tyres, and really all he needed to do was use that tyre advantage to be able to get past. And instead, going into the final lap in turn 1, instead of positioning his car to get a great exit from turn 1 and 2 on much better tyres, which would have been the smart thing to do, he instead tried a move that no one tries, which is to go round the outside at turn 1 and complete the move that way. Very baffling strategy from Lando, and he paid for it. He did not get the move done and ended up third. Again, for how scruffy his race was, it wasn't really a deserving third place. But at least there was a Grand Prix the next week in Saudi Arabia where he could correct what happened in Bahrain, and it was seeming as though he was going to do that. He was very quick in practice, looked very quick in qualifying, up until Q3, when of course Q3 is when it matters when it comes to delivering pole position. And on Lando's first attempt, he almost immediately crashed and heavily damaged his car at turn 4, smashing into the barriers and bottling a chance at pole position, a really good chance at pole position again in a car that good. He would then have to line up P10 for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. In the end, once again, he was close to another car ahead and close to getting an even better result than what he ended up with. This time, he ended up missing out on the podium altogether, which was not entirely down to not just being quick enough from where he was starting from. It was once again down to a lack of racecraft that he showed very clearly during that Grand Prix with Lewis Hamilton, where he passed Lewis Hamilton in the final corner. As we know at this Saudi Arabian track, you get the DRS going down the pit straight if you are the car behind. Lando, seemingly the first time around, did not care about that and then got punished by Hamilton for that. And then for the second time, Lewis deliberately lifted early. Lando went ahead and then got overtaken again in quite humiliating fashion. And McLaren's team principal then came out after the race and said that was the reason he didn't finish on the podium, because again of that poor racecraft, where really, given that he has, quite a bit of experience around the Jeddah circuit, he should know that that is a thing around that circuit, and especially through that final corner going onto the pit straight, and should not be falling victim to that type of tactic twice. So if we look at what's happened since that Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne, it's been quite messy and very disappointing from Lando Norris, who is, based on his own driver performance, quite lucky that he's in a McLaren that is as quick as it is. Because if he was in a car like the Mercedes or the Ferrari, he would be quite a few positions lower in the championship. His performance level has not been anywhere near good enough to be championship material. And essentially, if you look at all the bad things from last year, the things that we criticised him over and the things that we said would be issues for him going forward if he was ever going to try and win a championship, they've just continued into this year. When the pressure rises, he does not rise to the occasion. He cracks under pressure most times than not. He makes way too many silly mistakes for a driver of his quality. And again, that is down to the pressure of the situation. And mentally, even though we are not even into the month of May, he's already massively crumbling in this World Championship battle. And within his own team, mentally, Oscar Piastri has the clear edge and is clearly the better driver at this time in terms of driver performance. And that is another factor that is absolutely going to be playing on Lando's mind. Because it could very well be the case that Lando, who has been McLaren's boy ever since he came into the McLaren team in 2019, that might not be the case anymore by the end of this year. It very well could be Oscar's team at the end of 2025. And that is something we do need to keep an eye on in regards to how that plays on Lando's mental state, at least on track going forward for the rest of the year. Now, in terms of cracking under pressure when the pressure rises, there's nothing really I think Lando can do about that. There are some drivers and there are some sportsmen or sportswomen in general that either crack under the pressure or rise to the occasion. Lando is one of those people that just does not rise to the occasion when the pressure increases. And I just don't see him getting better at that. As I said in my video, looking at Lando Norris's 2024 season, which if you haven't seen, by the way, make sure you go check out on the channel. I'll have a link to it in the description. I don't think Lando is going to get better at that. He is, already quite experienced in Formula 1, been in Formula 1 for a few years now, been racing for quite a long time, and I don't think that's a thing he's just going to get much better at between now and the end of his career. One thing that would help, though, is him not talking to the media the way he has been in this season so far. And I don't mean necessarily when he's been criticising himself. At least it is good to see that Lando recognises when he has performed poorly. Maybe he could be a bit less critical, a bit less harsh of his own performance, but it is at least good to see that he recognises when he hasn't performed well enough. What I'm talking about is Lando talking about the pace of the McLaren and downplaying the pace of the car. He needs to cut that out completely. The simple fact is, the McLaren car, whether people like it or not, it is the best car on the grid. Everybody should be agreeing on that. It is pretty clear to see by this point of the season. But because I think, and I'm not going to say this is absolutely true, but I think Lando is aware of the criticisms that others have made of him, say, online. He knows that these poor mistakes and poor performances are even worse when you're in a car that good, which is why I believe he is trying to downplay how good the car is, because he knows it makes him look even worse if the car is that good and he's getting the results that he's been getting. But instead of worrying about how you look and what your reputation is like to F1 fans on social media, just focus on what's going on the circuit. Forget about social media. I know he's very heavy on social media, has a massive presence. He has obviously a channel. He's been streaming for years. I get that. But it's not helping his current situation. But whether he does actually cut that out, we will have to see. In regards, though, to this season, I don't see Lando Norris at all winning the 2025 championship. I don't even think he's the strongest contender in his own team. His teammate is definitely, for me, a stronger contender for the Drivers' Championship. Lando has much to improve if he wants to get onto the level that Piastri's been on in these first 5 races. And to be honest, given how the other 3 drivers in the championship contention right now performed compared to Norris, Lando is extremely fortunate once again that he is in that car, because if he was in a Ferrari or a Mercedes, he would already be out of contention with this level of performance. But next we will go on to not his teammate, but to a fellow Brit, George Russell. A driver that has never been in a Drivers' Championship battle, and I'm very keen to see how he would get on in a championship battle, and I think this year is going to be the year we find out whether he can rise to the occasion. If we look at this year so far, he has been very, very good. This has probably been the best start to a season he has had so far in his Formula 1 career. He's been very, very good, very, very quick. And even though the last Grand Prix in Saudi Arabia, the pace was quite poor, still got a decent 5th place and has been consistent with his results despite not getting a race win, which is why he's still decently close in the Drivers' Championship standings. What we really need to see, though, as I said, it felt like a million times during the streams I've done in the last few weeks, is we need to see Mercedes bring a big upgrade to this car to move it onto the level where Russell can legitimately win races. Because the Mercedes car right now is only good enough for a podium. And as long as Lando Norris didn't make errors like he has been making, Russell at best really would be getting 3rd place every Grand Prix with this car. He needs that upgrade to really, really work for him. And I believe that big upgrade may be coming at Imola, which is not too far away from now. If that upgrade does work, I think George Russell starts to win races and absolutely asserts himself strongly in the championship conversation. And to compare it to, say, last season, if we look at last season, it is similar to what McLaren went through. When McLaren last year started the year fundamentally with a good car, had a lot of good downforce, very good grip, it just wasn't on the same level as the Red Bull car that started the year. But then, obviously, at the Miami Grand Prix, they brought a big upgrade and then got on to clearly the level of Red Bull pace-wise. And even though Norris was lucky to win that Miami Grand Prix, from that race on, McLaren were able, every single Grand Prix, to contend for victory. And that is exactly what Mercedes need. Because just like McLaren last year, Mercedes fundamentally have a really good car. It's good in all types of corners, manages its tyres relatively well. Wasn't too great in the last Grand Prix in Jeddah, but it's pretty good at everything, this Mercedes car. It just isn't on the same level as the McLaren. Again, just like McLaren at the start of last year compared to Red Bull. But if that upgrade does give them that extra, say, half a second, George Russell should be winning races, not every week, but on a semi-regular basis, especially with the level he is performing at. So we will see whether Mercedes can make that step up. But one thing I will add as a warning with George Russell is, of course, we do not know in a championship battle whether he will crack under pressure like a Lando Norris has been doing in the last year or so, or whether he will truly rise to the occasion like his ex-teammate Lewis Hamilton brilliantly used to do in so many championship battles. That is the only thing we need to find out, because Russell performing as he is now, that's great, but he doesn't have the pressure of knowing he is in a championship battle absolutely until the end of the season, because the car still ultimately is not the best. But if he gets into a position where the car is able to win every weekend, then we will see whether he can keep this level up. And I'm really keen against Max Verstappen to see whether he can go properly toe-to-toe with Verstappen and perform at a high level against the current world champion. George Russell's last championship experience, of course, was Formula 2 in 2018, which was, 7 years ago? It was a great championship. He won that year, but he didn't really have that much competition for it because he was just so good that season in the ART car, I believe it was, in 2018. So ultimately, we will find out. But he is, Russell, my dark horse for the Drivers' Championship. Cannot wait. If Mercedes do improve this car, cannot wait to see not only Russell, what he is capable of in this car, but Antonelli as well, who I'm sure will get better. And on the constructor side, if Mercedes start to gain points on McLaren, maybe Antonelli will be a big help on that side of things. But now we move on to the other McLaren driver and, most importantly, your current championship leader, Oscar Piastri. What a season he has had. A very surprising season. Coming into the year, I did not think Piastri would be a championship contender. I thought he would win some races, maybe get the odd pole position, but I did not think, especially in qualifying, he would make that big jump forward like he has. And immediately from the first Grand Prix, you could tell Piastri, over a single lap, has improved a lot. And that is the biggest reason Oscar Piastri is in the position he is in now, because regularly now, over a single lap, he can beat his teammate, who of course was very dominant against Piastri in qualifying in the last couple years. And we know from last year that in race situations, he is a lot more of a comfortable bet than Lando Norris is to pull off the best result for McLaren. And because of the improvement of qualifying pace, that's why he has got 3 race wins out of the first 5 races. 2 of those wins converted from pole position. And you could very well say, given the McLaren is the best car on the grid and Piastri has started so well, you could very well say that Oscar Piastri is the current favourite for the Drivers' Championship. Another very important factor, though, behind Piastri, I think being in the position he's in now, but it will be even more important as the season goes on, is something we've seen from him really ever since he started racing in open wheel cars a few years ago. He is a very old, calm head on young shoulders. He does not really seem to feel any pressure. He is very calm behind the wheel compared to his teammate, who is almost the complete opposite. That is such a big benefit for Piastri, especially when he's having to race other cars in, very big moments, whether it's the start of a Grand Prix or towards the end of a Grand Prix. He doesn't really seem to get flustered under the pressure, and that is really a massive helping for him in a championship battle. And he does seem to be one of those drivers that, again, when the pressure rises, he does seem to at least mostly rise to the occasion, and that again will massively help his championship bid. And another thing that does help his bid a lot is that already he has, by a decent distance so far, given that we've only had 5 races, the most wins of the season. He has 3 wins out of 5, and the next best is Verstappen and Norris tied on 1 victory in the first 5 races. As long as he makes sure to keep ahead and at the top of that statistic, as I said earlier, that probably will be enough once we get to the end of the season, unless Max Verstappen does an absolute madness, which is very possible. But Piastri, because of how consistent he's been so far, it will be very hard to stop Oscar winning the championship. And at this point of the season, McLaren are still clearly the fastest team. Red Bull with Max Verstappen have popped up there a couple times, and Max has been absolutely brilliant so far this season. But the key, I think, for Oscar keeping up this level going forward for the rest of the season is for McLaren to remain clearly faster than Red Bull. Doesn't need to be over half a second quicker, even if it's 2 or 3 tenths of a second in McLaren's favour. I think that is enough to help Oscar continue on the form he's in and probably win the championship in the end. And the reason I say that is because even though I do like Oscar Piastri a lot, I've always been a fan of his, I've always liked just his all-around skill set, and again, given how calm he is behind the wheel and how he doesn't really crack under the pressure, I've always been a fan of this guy. But we all know he is not on the same level as Max Verstappen. Is there any driver out there that is on the same level as Max Verstappen? That's an interesting debate at the moment, given just how great Verstappen has been so far this season and just in the last couple years especially. But one thing I do know is even though Piastri is very, very good, he is not on the same level as Max Verstappen. Therefore, he will need a car that is definitely quicker than the Red Bull. In the same or similarly paced cars, Max Verstappen most times out of 10 beats Oscar Piastri. That is just the simple reality. But if McLaren maintain their advantage, it very well could be the first Australian champion in Formula 1 since 1980. And there is, I will say, if Max Verstappen does not retain his championship and become a 5-time drivers' champion this year, Oscar Piastri, I think definitely you'd have to say at this point, is the most likely to take away Max's crown. Even though I think George Russell is a really strong dark horse and I can't wait to see what he could do in a faster car, Oscar is clearly stronger than his teammate and that car is really, really good. But ultimately, my personal favourite still for the championship is the drivers' champion, Max Verstappen. This season, despite having definitely not as good of a car and the car having many issues, Max Verstappen is still only 12 points off the lead of the championship, which is remarkable given how miserable he's been at times and how it's been seeming as though this might be his last year at Red Bull because of just how far the car has fallen in terms of performance. But still, as I said, only 12 points off the lead of the championship. And as well, if you go back and look, just for comparison's sake, to last year, after the first 5 races and sprint race we had in China in 2024, Max Verstappen had 110 points, which was obviously at a time where Red Bull easily had the best car, were dominating, and we all thought Verstappen was going to win the championship in the summer. If you look at his current points total this year, it's 87 points. That's only 23 points less than he was on this time last year. Now, I know, obviously, the Australian Grand Prix in 2024, Max had a DNF. That does add to that quite a lot, but still, Max had 110 points after the first 5 races and sprint race in 2024, and of course still became world champion. And again, it's only 23 points worse off in what is a much slower car. So I think if you're a Verstappen fan or a Red Bull fan, when you add in that context, that really should make you realise that things on the championship, the Drivers' Championship side, are nowhere near as bad as it may seem. But if we look at the races so far, Verstappen pretty much all the time has got the absolute maximum out of the car, no pun intended. In Melbourne, nearly won the Australian Grand Prix because of a broken floor for Lando Norris, was right there at the end, still got a really good second place. Chinese Grand Prix was not a great event for Red Bull, their car was not very strong there. Verstappen still, though, collected a good result of 4th place, the best he could have done in that car that day and that weekend. Japanese Grand Prix was one of the best performances we have seen in a long time. Somehow put it on pole and then held on for a brilliant close victory in Japan. That was a key moment in Verstappen's season in giving him or keeping the confidence there that he can still win this championship, even if he's not in the best of cars. Bahrain, of course, was a big downturn, awful qualifying and then an awful race, all because of the Red Bull car's handling and also awful pit stops in the race. Really did not help. But then in Saudi Arabia, finished in 2nd, got pole, and maybe if the start had been a slight bit better, maybe, who knows, wins the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Considering that Red Bull car is probably overall the 3rd best car on the grid, that's a pretty good start, I think, in that car for Max Verstappen. And we know as well he can maintain this really high level. All that he needs is the car to get better. If the car gets better and closer to McLaren, he will win more races and he will win the championship. And if it gets to the point where Red Bull do have the best car at some point later this season, Max wins the championship 100 million%, because he is still absolutely the best driver on the grid. But even if the Red Bull car does not get to the point where it's, let's say, the best car on the grid, if it's within a couple tenths of a second of the McLaren, given how much time Max Verstappen is worth on track, which seems to be 3 or 4 tenths at least, that's probably enough anyway to get Max Verstappen a few race wins and allow him to win the championship anyway. And we saw that to a degree in 2021, where even though there were times where the Red Bull car was the quickest that season, there were times the Red Bull was slower than the Mercedes, that of course had the greatest of all time, Lewis Hamilton, at his peak behind the wheel, and Max was still, week in, week out, able to get really great results. So as long as the Red Bull car is close enough, with Verstappen at the wheel, anything's possible. And that is why Max Verstappen is still my championship favourite. Here is the order of favourites for me in the championship right now. Max, for me, again, number 1. Piastri, number 2. Russell, I would put in number 3, ahead of Norris. I know the McLaren is a lot quicker than the Mercedes right now, and Lando's head in the championship, but the performance level difference between Russell and Norris is massive. Russell has been so much better than Norris this season. For me, it's not even close. And the only way this table of 4 in terms of who is favourite to least favourite, the only way it changes is if, say, McLaren get even quicker compared to the rest of the field and Piastri keeps winning race after race, then I probably would, maybe in a few races, put Oscar in the position of clear favourite for the championship. But also, if Mercedes improve their car and get into a position of winning races, I might put Russell a position or 2 higher. With Lando Norris, though, I'm probably going to keep him in 4th because I just don't believe the guy is championship material. But let me know, guys, in the comments section down below. Going forward for the rest of the season, who do you think wins the World Championship? And as well, for certain other drivers in this video, what do they need to do? What do they need to improve, or what do they need from their teams to get better and to possibly win the championship? Let me know in the comments section. Really keen to see who you think is the favourite on the championship side. And make sure to let me know again in the comments. Make sure to smash the like button before you go, guys. It really does help show me that you guys enjoy the content. And until my next bit of content this Saturday live for qualifying for the Miami Grand Prix, it has been me, Chazzer HD. Goodbye.